O ye of little faith. We thought we would never get an FAQ or an errata, and here it is. I've been away for a couple weeks now, and I apologize for that, guys. I've just had a lot going on in my personal life, and I've just had to focus on that instead of making videos. But for the most part, all of that is over with now, and I should be able to get back to our normal schedule. Really appreciate everybody's support and participation in the channel. It's been really rewarding and encouraging, and I really have enjoyed making these videos, and I hope to continue to make them for a long time to come. So that's enough about that. I'd like to talk today about this new FAQ document we've gotten. We've actually gotten, I think, 3 covering the rulebook, the Great Slaughter, and the Rise of the Dark Mechanicum. And I thought we'd just go through them all today together, and I'll give you my thoughts about the changes. Some good, some maybe disappointing, more for their lack of inclusion rather than the change itself being disappointing. But we'll talk about that at the end. I definitely hope that as we go through this video, that you'll make your own comments. Take a look through this errata document yourself. Let me know what you think about the changes and what you hope to see maybe in the future. So let's start with the first change, which is to the march order. And this is a big change because it looks like infantry can now no longer march 3 times their movement, which I think is a good change, really. I think this is an important change because, first of all, it's never really made that much sense to me that infantry could move that quickly. It sort of negates the movement advantage that vehicles and cavalry have. It makes transports, and I'm speaking of the earlier condition when they could march 3 times their movement value, right? It makes transports not as useful, and infantry already have a big movement advantage over vehicles and so forth because they can move through structures, they can move through terrain without any kind of difficulty. So combining that with being able to move 3 times their movement value on a march order was really powerful, and I think it really negated some of the advantages that drop pods, transports, and aerial transports all brought to the infantry game. And I think this will also tone down infantry just in general as well. So I think this is a great change. It makes sense. It will improve gameplay, I think, and it will improve the value of other detachments, which are supposed to help infantry move about the table more effectively. This change to movement characteristic of dash means models in the detachment cannot move, cannot embark, or disembark from a transport. So basically, this means that the argument about putting tarantulas in rhinos is put to bed. I know there were a lot of people who strenuously fought for the right to incorporate or embark transports with tarantulas. I always thought that was a very silly argument, but there it is. We have it now in magenta, if not black and white, and so that is nixed. The advancing fire stage, all models, or excuse me, all detachments must be activated in the advancing fire stage. I'm not quite sure. I guess this is just making a restriction explicit in the rules rather than having to, kind of imply it. So I don't think this is a huge change. I think everybody was activating their detachments anyway. But maybe there were circumstances where people were not activating detachments in order to avoid Overwatch or something like that. But anyway, that seems like a common sense thing. Resolving hits. So again, this is kind of a nitpicky argument that I've sort of not really gotten into too much. But you're really supposed to, from my understanding, fire model by model in a detachment. And you only use this quick resolution that I think everybody uses in general as a way to speed up the game. And so you're really supposed to consider line of sight by model. And you're not supposed to you shouldn't be taking casualties that cannot be hit. and enemy models do block line of sight. So within an enemy detachment, you really shouldn't be taking casualties that are not within line of sight, even if they're in the same detachment. So I think this is trying to make that more explicit. I know that may be a controversial point of view. Let me know what you think in the comments about that. But I do think that is how the rules are intended to be played, and the quick firing resolution just makes that a little messier. Garrisoning structures. A detachment can garrison a structure if this would bring it within the engagement zone of an enemy model, but not if it would cause them to become engaged. Okay, so that just means that, if I know there's been some concern about, moving a detachment close up to a structure to keep somebody from garrisoning it, and I think that is sort of the rules writers making sure that is not allowed to happen. Engage in garrison structures. Infantry models in base-to-base contact with the structure count is engaged with all the enemy detachments garrisoned within the structure. So again, I think that's a common sense thing. Perhaps this is saying that now you need to be on a charge order in order to garrison, so that you can engage the enemy model. I'd have to look at that more closely, but I think that makes sense. I don't think that's a huge change. Burrowing. Weapons with the burrowing trait cannot target flyers. I don't know even why this needs to be errata. I guess people are firing their mole mortars at aircraft. People do silly things sometimes. It really makes me wonder. Um, no offense to anybody out there who was firing their mole mortars at Thunderhawks or something. But I mean, this is a common sense thing, and I think if that is something people were doing, then it's definitely a change that needed to be made. Engine killer. This is just the change they made before, so that vehicles are also eligible for the engine killer weapon. So here we come to a couple of much needed changes. They've addressed both Quake and Shock Pulse. So now the rules function, I think, in a much more effective way, because it is now the next time the detachment moves, their movement is halved. And the next time the detachment fires, you subtract 1 from the result of all hit rolls. It's ignored if it's allocated to a void shield. Fine, that makes sense. Shock Pulse, however, is not ignored if it's fired against a target with active void shields. So that is good. I mean, we're differentiating the two rules, right? One is more valuable in some sense against Titans, but it looks like they do essentially the same thing. Oh, no, excuse me. Yeah, I forgot. So the Shock Pulse rule is going to restrict it to one weapon only, whereas the Quake rule is going to reduce all weapon hit rolls. So, a little bit different there. But I think that's good because it makes the Shock Pulse rule more targeted towards those Titans, which I think is what you want to be trying to angle those weapons towards. Skyfire, change the last sentence of the second paragraph to all Skyfire weapons in a detachment firing at a secondary target must target the same detachment. I think that makes sense, right? We're not doing split fire with normal detachments. We're only doing split fire under specific circumstances, like with point defense weapons or with Skyfire. I think this makes sense. Good change. Warp. This is an old change. Automated sentry. This is good, right? I never really thought it made that much sense that tarantulas had tactical strength, but they've made that explicit here. Deep strike. If a model scatters off the battlefield into an area of impassable terrain onto a structure, that model and the model's detachment are destroyed. And you're now allowed to overwatch against a detachment that has deep struck. And I think this is another good change. I know this was a contentious argument, and I think the ruling had been before that you could not overwatch a deep strike, but it looks like now you can, and I think that's a good change. I think that's going to help maybe limit some of the abuses of deep strike, which is a powerful rule. Okay. Drop pod. Add the following additional paragraph. Models in a detachment with a special rule have a tactical strength of 0. Okay, again, this makes sense. It doesn't make sense for a drop pod to have tactical strength. Although I think that was how it was being played before, and that's why this change needed to be made. So another good change. Flyer models with the flyer special rule cannot call Overwatch during the movement phase. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. They already have the interceptor rule for that function in the game, and I think this is going to encourage people to use that rule rather than, I don't know, trying to abuse Overwatch. It also just makes more sense, right? The aircraft is not hanging out, I guess, unless it's in hover. But the flyer is moving very quickly over the field. It's not hanging out trying to wait for an opportunity to shoot another flyer. Like, that's what the interceptor rule is for. And so I think this is a good change. Forward deployment, I think this is just making clear the order in the rulebook. I think it is, if you pay close attention, it is spelled out that forward deployment comes after infiltrate, but I don't think it was very explicit. So I think this is just making that change. Here's a big change that I think a lot of people will be happy about, and I think a house rule that many people have been using to restrict infiltrate in some sense, that it cannot, a detachment that is deployed with infiltrate cannot be issued a charge order during the first round. So I think, again, another good change. It is going to limit some of the abuses, I think, especially for Solar Auxilia Pioneer companies loaded with Ogrons and Velatari. They're not going to be as nearly as effective as they had been. So I think another great change from the team. Master Tactician. This bit, let's see, a detachment that contains one or more models with a special may issue a command when it is activated. So I think this is just making the ruling a little bit more clear. Let me look in my rulebook real quick. So, page 93, Master Tactician. So the previous, let's see, the previous version says, I don't think there's any major change here. I think it just makes the rule a little bit clearer. Yeah, I don't really see. I know I'm just looking at it quickly here, but I don't really see any major changes. Um, I think it's just making it a little bit clearer. So, yeah, I don't have too much to say about that. Transport, transport models can only embark onto transport models from the same army list. I mean, again, I think this is a common sense thing, but you have people who will try to do interesting things on the table, and unfortunately, appealing to common sense is not always an effective arbitrator of what can and can't be done. So I think it's good that they're making this clarification. Breakthrough at the start of the first round, before any order tokens are placed, the player with this secondary objective secretly notes down up to 5 friendly detachments that are either deployed on the battlefield or embarked within a transport that is deployed on the battlefield to be carrying some supplies. So again, I'm going to have to look and see what this exact change is. So I don't really like Breakthrough as a secondary mission because you have to give up a lot of your army um, to score points. But let's see. Here's the original. At the start of the first round, before any order tokens are placed, the player with this secondary objective secretly notes down up to 5 friendly detachments that are either deployed on the battlefield or embarked within a transport to be carrying some supplies. Models with the flyer. Okay, so basically this is just saying that if they're in a transport, it has to be on the table. So you can't have something in reserve. Which I'm not sure when that would happen, but that seems like the only change that is being made here. Which, I mean, that's good. They fixed the Legion Storm Eagle. Okay, we've seen that already. Ultramarines, interlocking tactics. An Ultramarines model may reroll any hit rolls of 1 when firing upon an enemy detachment that has already had 1 or more models one or more hits scored against it this round by an Ultramarines model from a different detachment in the same formation. Okay, so this is, I think, where people were firing with a detachment and then going model by model and then claiming that they could use interlocking tactics. So again, like per the letter of the rules, I think that was, quote unquote correct, but obviously against the spirit of the rule. So I think this is a fine change. I still think the Ultramarines rule isn't that great, but here we go. The word bearers. Okay, so this is just changing the word bearers rule to bring it into line with the actual rules that a broken formation can only be issued advance or charge. There was a misprint or a mistake in the rules where I think it said advance or march. So anyway, they've fixed that, which I think everybody was playing with anyway. But it's good to have it in paper or in writing. So here's the most controversial item: the Alpha Legion. So they've changed the first sentence to at the start of the battle before any detachments are deployed for each formation in an army made up entirely of Alpha Legion detachments, ignoring allied contingents. The controlling player may select up to 3 Alpha Legion detachments in the army to be affected by mutable tactics. So let me get my rulebook again. At first glance, I think all that this is doing is basically clarifying that you can still have allied detachments. Yeah, that's it. So in the original rule, it makes it sound like your entire army must consist of exclusively Alpha Legion detachments. However, it does not, at least according to the update. So basically, this means you can include allied detachments, at least the way I'm reading this change. So I think I can say most people will be disappointed by this. I mean, they clearly looked at the Alpha Legion rule. They clearly decided to make a change to it. The fact that they did not change the actual rule when it is clearly, I mean, it clearly needs to be adjusted and fixed. Um, I think it's very strange. Maybe they don't want to make such large changes to the game. I mean, it is one of 18 Legion special rules. I don't think it would be that much of a stretch to make the fix, but it hasn't been done. So again, unfortunately, this is going to have to be something that the community takes in hand and takes responsibility for, and until GW, I guess, sees fit to really fix it. So anyway, we can talk more about that maybe at the end, but I think this is a very minor change and not what was needed. So that's all of the actual errata. Let's move on to the FAQ. Are engaged and pinned detachments issued orders and normal? Yes. Okay. I think we all knew that. Um, an engaged and pinned detachment makes a pylon move while issued a charge order. Do models that were not in base device contact still gain the bonus to fight if they move more than an inch? This is how I've always played it. So I'm glad to see that confirmed. Does a detachment that is on the losing side in a combat and fails the morale check receive a fallback order in addition to making a withdrawal move? Yeah, so this is another very big confusion with Legions Imperialis, right? A withdrawal move is very different from a fallback order, and I think that caught me up when I first started playing, and I think it still catches up a lot of people too. So when you get that fallback, when you fail that morale check from a shooting attack, it's not different, or it is not the same as making a withdrawal when you fall back. I mean, it's confusing, right? Because just naturally we can conflate the two terms. But when you withdraw from combat, you're just getting out of there. You're not necessarily being broken. You're not losing your morale. You're just withdrawing to get out of a bad tactical situation. If a detachment with a movement characteristic of 0 or dash is not within movement coherency, can it move in order to avoid models being destroyed? No. Okay. I mean, that makes sense. If a structure is within range of an objective marker, are all models garrisoned in that structure treated as being within range of that objective marker? Yes. Okay. That's how I've played it, certainly. And I mean, that seems pretty clear to me from the rules as they're written. If a structure collapses, can surviving garrison models be placed in a position where they are engaged with enemy models? No. Okay, that's fine. That makes sense. When firing a weapon with the Firestorm trait at a structure, is every model garrisoning the structure hit? Okay, so this is a big change because it makes it sound like simply firing the model or firing the weapon is enough to hit every model garrisoning the structure. And before, I think how I was playing it, and I think how most people were interpreting it, was this only occurred if the Firestorm template, or if the template covered the entire structure, then everybody was hit. I think this is a good change. I think this will make Firestorm weapons much more effective because most structures are going to be bigger than that template, right? Like the recommended minimum size is about 2 inches by 2 inches, and that's bigger than the template, right? So um, I think we'll see more Firestorm weapons now, which is good. I mean, we always want, especially for the Solar Auxilia, who don't have such great ways to dig infantry out of buildings. We'll be able to see more of the Malcador Infernus variants on the table, which I think is good. If a detachment with the automated sentry special rule has another model assigned or attached to it, can it be issued an order? Okay, no. All right, yeah. So this is another silly thing that people are trying to do, and so I'm glad that Games Workshop is putting the nix on it. Detachments with the automated sentry special rule cannot be issued orders. Does this mean they will automatically be issued an advanced order when activated, as per the no orders in the movement phase rule? No. Okay, that makes sense. If a detachment has dedicated transport, is it required to be deployed or arrive from reserves embarked upon them? No. Okay. I mean, fair enough. Is the limit on the number of legate commanders permitted in a Solar Auxilia army based on the total agreed points limit of the battle rather than the total points value of detachments in that player's army? Okay, yeah, I mean that makes sense, right? You're allocating a certain amount of forces, and whether you exactly meet that or you're a few points short, that makes sense. The one thing, maybe the one wrinkle here is if you have an allied Solar Auxilia army, maybe there's some room to, like, if it's a 3,000 point army, do you use the 3,000 points or the allied point limit? I would say that you probably use the allied point limit, but I'd have to look at the rules again. Detachments are models that do not count when calculating the break point of a formation, such as dedicated transports, count towards reaching the break point of their formation when destroyed. So I don't know how to feel about this. I'm not sure. I mean, dedicated transports, you don't get any kind of points break that I know of, so they're not cheaper to take. They don't count towards your formation breakpoint, so your formation is going to be easier to break. I guess the advantage for taking dedicated transports is that it takes up that single slot. You can take a lot of them, and so you're paying for that by not having as durable formation. And when you lose them, you're now going to be breaking your formation much easier. So yeah, I think this is a good change. People aren't going to be throwing away their rhinos like they were before, because they now actually count towards the break point of your formation. So yeah, I'm all for this. I think this is a good change, and I think this is going to encourage a higher quality of play, a more realistic quality of play, now that people actually have to care about their dedicated transports. Let's see. If a detachment in a broken formation is on the losing side, forced to make a morale check. Okay, so this is just saying, yes, it is reduced by 1 for the rule for broken formations. Okay, that's fine. Is the penalty to hit rolls imposed when firing a detachment in dangerous terrain cumulative? Interesting. So, yes, it is cumulative. So, Death Guard making structures dangerous? Maybe not so good. When a model with a variant of the transport special rule is destroyed during Overwatch, are transported detachments placed within 2 inches of the destroyed model? Okay, yeah. Um, this designer's note is interesting. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I think basically what it's saying is that you need to complete your movement before any casualties are deployed. So that was something that I played incorrectly, I think, in a battle report where I overwatched and models were put down at the point of Overwatch rather than at the end point of the movement. So that's just clarifying that element of the rule. If a detachment has dedicated transports, can another model join it, basically? Yes. Okay, makes sense. If it has a special rule that allows it to join other detachments. Can a flyer with the hover special rule that enters the battlefield from reserve replace the flyer special rule with the skimmer special rule when it is placed on the battlefield? No. Okay. I mean, that seems fair. Can special rules which require a detachment to be within a certain distance of another detachment take effect while the detachment is embarked on a transport? No. This was another contentious issue, I think. And I think this makes sense. Perhaps we'll see a special command variant Rhino or transports for all factions that allow command abilities to be used while it's embarked. So, I think that's perfectly fine. Can special rules which require detachment? Okay, so this is basically the same question, but whether when it's in a structure. Yes. So we have a difference between when you're embarked on a transport and when you're garrisoning a structure. I personally think that makes sense. Some people may disagree. If a model is equipped with 2 weapons with the engine killer and the rend traits, wins a fight, are the engine killer values cumulative? Yes. Okay. So very dangerous. I think we maybe already knew that, but this is just making it more clear. If an independent unit is forced to make a withdrawal move, is the detachment core of the same detachment also required to make a withdrawal move? No. Okay. I think that makes sense. They're treated as separate detachments, so I mean that's probably how I would have played it anyway. Can an eligible detachment using the infiltrate special rule deploy outside of a player's deployment zone, garrison a structure when it is deployed? Yes. This is huge. Big change. Major. So before, I think most people, almost everywhere, were playing it so that you could not garrison a structure when it is deployed. This is, I mean, like, I think this makes sense in terms of the narrative of the game. I think it makes sense that an infiltrating unit could infiltrate into a building. However, this makes infiltrate even better, which is not something that we need. So, like, I like the change in the sense that I think it makes sense. I don't like the change because it is, um, it's just making infiltrate that much more powerful. I mean, being able to put your infantry in a structure um, from the very start of the game, I don't think I need to tell you guys that this is game changing, possibly game breaking. We'll have to see. Um, but yeah, I think GW, I don't know. I think this is a good change in terms of making the game make more sense. It's a bad change in the sense that now infiltrate is just even better. So anyway, enough said about that. If an Ultramarines detachment fires weapons with the light trait at a detachment, so yes, this counts for interlocking tactics. Are large movable elements such as the doors on drop pods considered to be insignificant elements? No. Okay, that's fair. I think we were considering them to be insignificant elements before, but they're not. So when you deploy them, they're going to be easier to hit. If a transport is within 1 inch of a structure, can models disembark directly into that structure, garrisoning it? Yeah, I mean, I think that seems silly that you would be able to do that. So I'm glad that the team has said no, that is not possible. Okay, so we've gone over the main rule book, Errata, and FAQ. And there are two more documents that they've released for us, one for the Great Slaughter and one for the Rise of the Dark Mechanicum. So let's go over those real quick and talk about them briefly. So for the errata for the Great Slaughter, we had the Legion Death Storm drop pod battery. It now has the orbital assault special rule, which I mean I think that makes sense. It's a drop pod. It should have the orbital assault special rule. The more important change, though, I think, is the remote controlled detonation change, which now says that the central hole of the blast template is placed within an inch of the detonating model. It does no damage to itself. So, again, I think there were some weird things where people were saying the detonating model needed to be rolled to hit, and so it couldn't, if it, got damaged, it couldn't hit other targets. So again, I'm glad to see Games Workshop kind of tightening down on some of that silly stuff. The change, though, I think the material change is good because before, when you had to place the whole of the template on the model, it really restricted the number of targets that you could affect. Even if you had been able to charge the Cyclops into an enemy model, placing the hole over the model would really restrict the number of models that you could affect. Even more so when you hadn't put it on charge and it was outside of the engagement zone. So now being able to place the blast template within an inch makes it a much more effective model. And this is a good change. I think we're going to see more Cyclopses on the table, and I'm certainly going to give them more of a try than I had before, which I think was never. I might have played them once. So I'll definitely give them another shot here. For the FAQ section, if a Legion drop pod detachment or Dreadnought drop pod detachment is selected as dedicated transports, can Legion Palisade drop pods be added to that detachment? The answer is no. I don't think I've ever seen anybody ever use Legion Palisade drop pods. I certainly don't think they're worth the points that you pay for them, and this makes them even less effective. I don't think they were. I don't know why anybody would necessarily want to put them in a dedicated transport detachment. I don't think it makes sense. For most dreadnoughts that you're going to put in a drop pod, you're going to have that 5-up invulnerable save anyway. And the Palisade, I'm pretty sure, has a 5-up invulnerable save. So I don't really think this affects much, if anything, in the rules. So let's move on to the Rise of the Dark Mechanicum. So this is, let's go to the errata first. The change to the Collegia Titanica Army list. So this caused a lot of confusion when the rules came out. There's a big, people were very upset, complaining about GW's rules writing because originally the designer's note said that because Titans have a tactical strength of 0, they cannot capture objectives, okay, which is contrary to the wording in the main rulebook. So I think it was pretty clear what happened, right? That this was a designer's note intended to show why a Collegia Titanica army may be weaker because it has 0 tactical strength. This wording is just clarifying the intent there. So it's saying in match play missions, they suffer from a lack of objective control. With a tactical strength of 0, Titans will find it difficult to capture or contest objectives, which makes achieving a conventional victory difficult. In other words, you need to kill your enemy instead of taking objectives, which makes sense for Titans, clarifies the ruling, and hopefully makes everybody satisfied that this is the intent of the rule and of the designer's note rather than subverting the original intention of the main rulebook. Moving on, we have some great changes to the Mechanicum army list. The first is the Thalax cohort is losing its plasma fusel and gaining the multi-melta. I think we all knew that it was actually a multi-melta on the model. I think we even had a poll about it on the channel. It's clearly a multi-melta. And I am a little sad to lose the plasma fusel. I think it's a great weapon. It gives the Thalax a lot of firepower. But the multi-melta, AP -3 anti-tank, hitting on a 4, throw 8 multi-meltas at a detachment of tanks, and you're just going to tear right through it. So this makes the Thalax, I think, a bit more effective on the table. And definitely a more versatile and dangerous detachment. The Myrmidons also get another great change. They now have the Myrmidon Plasma Fusel in addition to the Maxima Bolters, which is great. I mean, they have it, again, they have it on the models. I was always very confused as to why they didn't have it in their stat line. They do now, however, and it's a 10-inch, 4+ to hit, AP -1, light AT weapon. Great addition. Glad to see them make this change to bring the models, the rules into line with what the models have. The Myrmidon Destructors also get another great change. Again, the models on the base have both the Myrmidon Volkites and the Conversion Beamers. However, in the original rules, you had to choose one or the other. And this change just makes it clear that, yes, each base does in fact have both weapons, which is something I kind of militated for, maybe not on the channel, but in our local group. And but I'm glad to see that Games Workshop has made this change official. I think this makes them an even better detachment. Same thing with the Myrmidon Secutors. The fact that they now have both of these weapons, can fire both of them at the same time, is really just fantastic. The last item we're going to review is the change to the Triaros Armored Conveyor. It now has Transport 4 instead of Large Transport, which is another sort of silly thing that happened when this first came out. People were trying to put Castellax and Thanatar in the Myrmidons, which was very silly. And I'm glad to see Games Workshop addressing that issue here and making it clear that you cannot do that. So that takes us to the end of the last errata and FAQ. I overall am very pleased with what we've gotten. Let me talk briefly, though, about what was not addressed, and then I'll give you a wrap-up of my final thoughts. I think the big change that everybody was hoping for or expecting is a fix to the Alpha Legion, which we did not get. We got a very minor change, which I think affected basically nothing. And I'm very confused. I'm gonna come after the writing team here briefly. They clearly looked at the rule and for whatever reason decided that Alpha Legion did not need to be fixed. I don't know why they would think that. I think if you asked anybody who's played Legions Imperialis, or even anybody who just looks at the rule in the rulebook, would say, wow, that is a very powerful, mutable tactics is a very powerful special rule. And again, as I said in my video where I rated all of the Legion special rules, it wouldn't be so bad if the Alpha Legion rule was equaled in power by the other Legion special rules. But the Alpha Legion special rule is head and shoulders above even the nearest one, which is probably the Raven Guard. And the fact that the writing team looked at the rule, clearly thought, hey, we need to fix something here. And the only change they decided to make was to make it clear that you could use mutable tactics even if you had allied detachments in your army is very strange to me. I would love to sit down with them for 5 minutes and just ask them, what their thought process is here and why they decided not to do something about the Alpha Legion. I guess I could say the same thing about Infiltrate as well. We had one change to Infiltrate that was to make it more powerful. Or you can now infiltrate into a building, which is huge. I'm sure there's going to be people out there who ignore that change and say, no, you can't do that, because I think it is a dramatic increase in the power of Infiltrate, because one of the downsides has always been you had to leave your infantry out in the open, unless you could infiltrate them into some kind of area terrain. Being able to infiltrate them onto a building next to an objective before the game even starts is just huge. And I've already talked about this already, so I won't belabor the point again. But it's a big change, and I'm confused that the team would look at Infiltrate and not consider making some other adjustments to reduce its impact on the game. I guess it's too interwoven into all of the different facets of the game to adjust, but I think something still needs to be done. As we talked about in my video where I talked about the local changes we had made to the Alpha Legion and to mutable tactics. I mean, Infiltrate just needs to be addressed in general. And I think it looks like we're going to have to handle that at the local level rather than as at GW's level, because it doesn't seem like they are going to take care of it. The other item I would have liked to have seen addressed in this errata are missile launchers, which are such a dominant weapon. And maybe I'll make a video about this as well, but they are such a dominant weapon, they need some kind of nerf or points increase or something, because they are probably one of the best, most effective weapons in the game, and they need to be brought more into line with some of the other weapons, just so they're not so dominant. Another item I would have liked to have seen is some kind of help for knights, which I think are not in a great way. Perhaps better armor, the ability to split fire, maybe. Fixing ion shields would have been good as well. Maybe I'll just make a video about knights. I haven't played them too much, if at all, so I want to get some more experience with them before I kind of get on a soapbox and talk about what they need to be better. But yeah, I think some help for knights would have been good here, and to a lesser extent, maybe titans. Just something to give them a little bit of more effect on the table. So those are the things that I'm a little disappointed not to have seen here. But overall, I think we've gotten a really good FAQ and errata from the writing team. A lot of good changes that make sense and that I think will improve the game overall. So kudos to them. Really glad to see them finally put out a errata FAQ document for us, which has been much needed. And I'm glad to see that they are doing it. It's going to reassure a lot of people. I know now that the releases have sort of slowed, there have been some people saying that Legions Imperialis is not selling well, that it's dying off, that it's not going to be supported, which we always get, right, when these things happen. So I'm glad to see this document. I hope people will be reassured. I think Legions Imperialis is doing well. I think it has a great future. And I hope that GW continues to listen to the community and address some of these issues that are being brought up as the game grows and changes. I think that's about all I have to say for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a bit of a longer one, I know, but this was a pretty lengthy errata, pretty lengthy FAQ. Definitely let me know your thoughts about the changes and about the document as a whole. And as always, just make sure to like and subscribe and stay in touch, and I'll see you in the next video.